Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going deep, really deep, into Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations.
Oh yeah, this is a big one.
It's considered like the foundation of modern economics.
Pretty much, yeah. It's amazing how relevant it still is.
We're going to unpack some of its key ideas, see how they resonate today. We've got some great source material here, the invisible hand,
Right.
division of labor,
Mm-hmm.
and why Smith believed free trade makes everyone richer.
All that good stuff.
You ready to dive in?
Let's go.
All right, let's start with one of Smith's most famous examples, the pin factory.
Oh yeah, classic.
He uses this to show the power of, dividing up labor.
Right. Smith observed that when you break down the process of making a pin into like all these specialized tasks, you get way more pins than if each worker tried to make the whole thing themselves.
Yeah, each worker focusing on their one tiny little thing.
Exactly.
Getting faster and more efficient. It seems so simple now.
I know, right?
But it was revolutionary.
Totally changed how we thought about production, efficiency, the whole thing.
And this idea of specialization, man, it's even more relevant today, right?
Absolutely. Think about global supply chains. Like parts of a single product are made all over the world.
It's like one giant puzzle.
Exactly. And each country kind of specializes in a few pieces.
It makes me think about how Smith viewed international trade.
Oh, yeah.
He was a big advocate for free trade between nations.
Huge advocate, yeah. He pushed back against, the whole idea of hoarding wealth, limiting imports.
Let's keep all the good stuff for ourselves.
Exactly. Smith argued that countries benefit by specializing and then trading with each other.
So instead of trying to do everything themselves.
Right. Focus on what they do best.
Gotcha. What he called
Comparative advantage.
comparative advantage. Right. Can you give us a real world example of how that works?
Sure. Imagine you have one country that's amazing at, say, producing those high-tech components for smartphones, and then another country that excels at developing, like the cutting-edge software.
Makes sense.
Even if one country could theoretically do both, it's way more efficient for them to specialize in trade.
So both countries end up with better tech.
Better tech, yeah, than if they tried to go it alone.
But, today there's a lot of talk about tariffs and trade wars.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder what Smith would say about all that.
Hard to say for sure, but given his stance on free trade, the benefits of specialization,
Yeah.
I'd imagine he'd lean towards open markets, more collaboration.
Okay, interesting. Let's shift gears for a sec.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the invisible hand.
The invisible hand.
It sounds kind of mysterious, almost like magic.
I know, right?
So basically, Smith argued that when individuals in a free market just do their own thing, pursue their own self-interest,
Right.
they can actually end up benefiting society as a whole.
Unintentionally, yeah.
It's not that they're trying to be altruistic or anything.
No, not at all. Think about competition in a free market. It pushes people to innovate, to offer better stuff at competitive prices.
It's all happening naturally.
That's the beauty of it. No one has to plan it.
It's funny, I remember when I first read about the invisible hand in college, I was like, come on, really?
Yeah, it's one of those things that can sound a bit far-fetched at first.
But then you start to see it everywhere.
Totally.
Like that new coffee shop down the street.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
The owner obviously wants to make money, right?
of course.
But they've also created this cozy little spot for the neighborhood.
Yeah, that's a good example. Shows how individual ambition can end up doing some good,
Right. But it's not a perfect system.
Of course not.
What happens when a company pollutes a river or something?
Right. There are definitely situations where the market doesn't self-regulate the way we'd like.
So it's not like Smith thought government should do absolutely nothing, right?
Oh, definitely not. He recognized there are times when government intervention is necessary.
Okay, so what did he see as the essential roles of government then?
Well, he outlined 3 key areas.
Okay, lemon.
Defense, first and foremost. Maintaining law and order within society.
Makes sense. So the police and courts and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And then providing what he called public goods.
Public goods.
Things like roads, bridges, education. Stuff that private businesses might not have enough incentive to provide on their own.
Interesting. These are still things we debate today.
Oh yeah, big time.
How much should the government be involved?
Exactly. Finding that balance between individual freedom and the collective good. It's a tough one. It really is.
Okay, before we move on, let's talk about another key concept from Smith. The difference between value in use and value in exchange.
Oh, that's a good one.
What's the difference? Break it down for me.
Okay, think of water. We need water to live. It has huge value and use.
Obviously.
But it's cheap.
Right.
Now think of diamonds. Not essential for survival,
Definitely not.
but they have a high value in exchange.
Because they're sparkly.
Because they're scarce, people want them.
Right. So something can be super useful, but not worth a lot of money.
Exactly. Smith was getting at this idea that wealth isn't just about money, it's about having access to the stuff that actually improves people's lives. That value in use is super important.
It makes you think, right? Like, what do we really value as a society? The essentials or the shiny things? Tough question.
Really tough. And that's something we'll keep unpacking in the next part for a deep dive. We'll look at some of the criticisms of Smith's work, see how they apply to the world today. It really is a tough question. What do we as a society truly value? And it kind of leads us to some of those criticisms of Smith's work.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that.
One of the big ones is that assumption that people, always act rationally in their own self-interest.
Yeah, that doesn't always seem to be the case.
Right. Like modern behavioral economics, it shows that people are often driven by emotions,
Makes sense.
biases, all these things that can lead to decisions that aren't purely rational.
So that economic man, always perfectly rational,
Yeah. Might not really exist.
people are messy.
Totally. And that means markets might not always work as smoothly as Smith thought.
It's like assuming everyone will follow the rules of the road.
Yeah, good analogy.
Most people do, most of the time.
Right.
But then you got those who speed or run red lights.
And that causes problems.
Mm.
And speaking of problems, another criticism is that Smith didn't really focus on the downsides of unchecked capitalism.
Like what?
Inequality, environmental damage, that kind of stuff.
Right, right. You've been reading a lot about inequality lately.
I have, yeah. It makes you wonder if Smith would have been concerned about that.
Yeah, what do you think?
It's tough to say.
Yeah.
But some critics argue that his focus on self-interest, limited government, it could actually worsen those problems.
How so?
Well, if businesses are only focused on profit, they might not care about things like fair wages or, the environment.
Like a company might decide it's cheaper to pollute than to, invest in proper waste disposal.
Exactly. And then it becomes a question of government's role.
Right.
Right?
Right, right.
Would Smith say, regulate those businesses? Or would he think the market will sort itself out?
It's a tough one. Would Smith still be all about laissez-faire capitalism today?
Hard to say.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he'd see the need for some government intervention, to address these problems we're facing.
So we shouldn't just take the wealth of nations as, like, the ultimate truth.
No, definitely not. It's a starting point, for critical thinking and discussion.
It's amazing how a book from the 1700s can still be so relevant.
I know, it really is. It speaks to how insightful Smith was. He nailed down some fundamental stuff about economics.
But we also have to recognize the limitations, right?
Of course.
The world has changed a lot.
A lot, yeah.
Global supply chains, multinational corporations.
Things he could never have imagined.
And then there's technology.
Oh, yeah, huge factor.
Like, on one hand, technology has driven so much innovation.
Just like the specialization Smith talked about.
Right. But it's also led to, automation, potential job losses.
Smith was writing when the Industrial Revolution was kicking off.
So he saw some of that firsthand.
He did. New machines, boosting productivity, but also disrupting things.
Like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. We can use technology for good.
But we got to be mindful of the impact.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to government. Smith liked limited government.
Right.
But even he saw that sometimes it's needed. Public goods, market failures, all that.
So where's that balance today?
Tough question. Especially with technology changing so fast. Globalization, all that. I think that's the challenge.
What do you mean?
Figuring out how much government involvement is needed to foster innovation.
But also protect workers.
Right. And promote fairness, make sure things are sustainable. It's not about blindly following Smith.
Or rejecting him completely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about engaging with his ideas, adapting them to today's world.
Makes sense. So the Wealth of Nations is more like a framework, not a rule book?
I'd say so, yeah. It helps us understand how economies work, how we create wealth, all that. But it's up to us to figure out how to apply those ideas today to build a better future.
It's amazing how, centuries later, Smith's ideas still spark debate.
It really is. It shows how powerful his work is, how relevant economics is, to everyone's lives.
Definitely. But we're living in a world Smith could never have imagined.
Oh, yeah, totally different. The internet, AI,
Right.
global pandemics even. Makes you wonder what he'd think.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Would he see all this as, like, a natural progression, or would he be blown away by how much things have changed?
right. I'd be curious to hear his take on technology, especially,
Me too. Like, on one hand, technology has led to so much innovation.
which fits with Smith's ideas about specialization.
Exactly. But then there's, automation, worries about jobs disappearing.
Well, Smith was writing when the Industrial Revolution was starting.
True. So he saw some of that disruption firsthand.
Yeah, he saw how new machines could boost productivity, but also change, you know, whole ways of life.
It's like every new technology, there's a good side and a...
A not so good side.
Yeah, exactly. We have to be careful how we use it.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the role of government. Smith was all about limited government,
Right. Letting markets do their thing.
but he also recognized that sometimes government needs to step in. Like, for public goods, dealing with those market failures we talked about.
So how do we find that balance today?
Yeah, it's tricky. The world's so complex now with globalization, all that. Figuring out how much government should be involved is a real challenge.
It is.
Like, how do we encourage innovation, but also protect workers,
Oh.
promote fairness, make sure things are sustainable? It's not easy.
It sounds like we can't just blindly follow Smith's ideas.
No, but we can't just ignore them either.
Right.
It's about learning from him, adapting his thinking to today's world.
Finding what works for us now.
Exactly.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the wealth of nations, what's the main thing you hope listeners take away?
That's a good question. I hope they see Smith's ideas not just as like history, but as things that are still relevant, things that can help us understand the world today.
Yeah, and maybe even inspire us to think differently about the future.
Definitely. Like, how do we create a better future for everyone?
Exactly. Well, we've covered a lot today.
We have.
Division of labor, the invisible hand, the role of government.
It's been a great discussion.
It has. And it's clear that Smith's work still has a lot to teach us about economics, human behavior, all the challenges we face.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure discussing all this.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the wealth of nations. We hope it sparked your curiosity. Keep exploring these ideas. See how they connect to your own life, to the world around you. Thanks for listening.